Think about your last week when you worked. How many hours did you put in? How many tasks did you juggle? And here's a harder question. How much meaningful progress did you actually make? If you're feeling exhausted and lagging behind, you're not alone. You're experiencing what economists call the productivity paradox, working harder yet achieving less. And as AI accelerates our capabilities, this paradox threatens to become even more destructive. Today, we'll explore this paradox from scientific, cultural, and cognitive perspectives. More importantly, we'll uncover practical strategies that actually work, approaches that respect both human limitations and human potential. Because the solution isn't working harder, it's working fundamentally differently. We've all felt it. That gnawing sense that despite constant activity, we're not moving forward. The endless task switching, the perpetual urgency, the growing anxiety that maybe we're just not working hard enough. This isn't about personal just frustration. It's about a fundamental mismatch between how we work and how work actually gets done in today's complex environment. What's particularly insidious is how we've confused busyness with productivity. We wear our 60-hour weeks like badges of honor, mistaking visible effort for actual value. This illusion isn't just exhausting, it's counterproductive. It keeps us from focusing on what matters most, and worst of all, blocks us from reaching our highest and best potential. And here's where AI changes everything. AI allows us to execute tasks faster and more efficiently, yet speed without direction can lead to significant missteps. Imagine putting a jet engine on a car without upgrading the steering or brakes. That's what happens when we apply AI to dysfunctional work patterns. We just crash faster. So, what exactly is the productivity paradox? At its core, is the phenomenon of diminishing returns on effort, where additional work hours yield progressively less value. You see it everywhere. The developer who codes for 12 hours straight yet produces more bugs than features. The manager who packs their calendar so much that it prevents them from thinking strategically and is always apologizing for missing your meetings due to overload. The team that's always busy yet never quite delivers. Let me share a real example. A client I worked with was under a particularly challenging deadline, and staff were working mandatory overtime, 60 hours a week minimum. Management assumed more hours meant more output. In the reality, after analyzing the data, we found that production quality dropped so sharply after hour 45 that they were actually losing money on overtime. The rework and defects completely offset any gains from extra hours. And here's the really counterintuitive part. They met their deadline by shortening the workday. With fewer hours, staff were able to focus better, produce higher quality work, and actually felt energized heading into the next day. Less time, better results. This isn't an edge case. This is a pattern that repeats across industries. In tech companies, I've seen teams grinding through iterations, pushing code at all hours, yet their velocity, their actual delivery of valuable functionality remained flat or even declined. In service industries, longer work hours often mean longer queues, more errors, and frustrated customers who then generate more work through complaints and corrections. So how did we get here? The roots, they trace back all the way to the industrial era, when work was physical and repetitive. In that context, more hours generally meant more widgets. Time on task equaled output. Management systems evolved to monitor and maximize time utilization. This is where the belief that if someone isn't visibly busy, they aren't adding value. A flawed perspective that leads to RTO and other inefficiencies. This all leads to what is called resource accounting. We optimize for what's counted, not necessarily what matters most. If your performance review measures hours logged or tasks completed, guess what you'll prioritize? Not innovation, not quality, not customer value, just activity. The system worked well enough when work was predictable and mechanical. Today's knowledge work requires creativity, problem solving, and adaptation, none of which scale linearly with time. Yet we're still using industrial age metrics and management approaches. There's also the 40-hour myth. This industrial assumption that workers can sustain 40 hours of peak cognitive work, just as factory workers sustain 40 hours of physical labor. Stanford research shows that cognitive productivity drops after approximately 50 hours per week. After 55 hours, the additional time is essentially wasted. For cognitive work requiring deep focus, especially when complexity is highest, even 40 hours may be too much. The paradox deepens when we consider inputs versus outputs. Traditional management focuses on inputs, hours worked, resources consumed, activities completed, and outputs, tasks and units of work completed. Agile thinking shifts focus completely to outcomes, value delivered, problems solved, customer needs met. When we measure the wrong things, we inevitably optimize for the wrong things. To understand why working harder fails, we need to understand how our brains actually function. Think of your brain as a computer, specifically your working memory as RAM. It can only hold and process a limited amount at once. Cognitive scientists have found we can consciously juggle maybe between 4 to 7 chunks of information simultaneously. That's it. No amount of willpower changes this fundamental biological constraint. Every time you switch tasks, you experience what researchers call attentional residue. Unlike a computer, which can wipe its memory clean to process the next instruction, part of your focus remains stuck on the previous task, like mental glue. This isn't just an emotional feeling, it's neurologically measurable. Brain scans show that after switching tasks, neural activity related to the previous task continues for several minutes, competing for resources with your current focus. Here's where the multitasking myth becomes dangerous. True multitasking, simultaneously processing multiple cognitive tasks, is neurologically impossible for humans. What we call multitasking is actually rapid task switching, and each switch has a cost. Dave Crenshaw, in The Myth of Multitasking, he demonstrated that this switching can reduce efficiency by up to 40%, sometimes more. You're not doing two things at once. You're doing two things badly in alternating succession. Interestingly, even computers don't truly multitask. They rapidly switch between processes just fast enough to create the illusion of simultaneous execution. Yeah, technically, yeah, it's true that quantum computing does simultaneous state evaluation through superposition and entanglement, but this has no practical application for human cognition or daily decision making. We still see and process each output in succession. Computers have contributed significantly to the myth of multitasking in the workplace. It was the desktop computing revolution that actually worsened our productivity paradox. Before personal computers became ubiquitous, workers submitted jobs to mainframes and did other work at the same time. While waiting, the workflow naturally created breaks and task boundaries. However, when everyone got a desktop computer, managers assumed that instant access meant workers could juggle multiple complex tasks continuously. This fatally flawed assumption is at the root of why modern workplaces still believe and demand multitasking. Now, technically, humans do perform one type of multitasking. We process conscious and subconscious inputs in parallel. And you've probably experienced solving a problem after sleeping on it or during a shower. That's your subconscious mind working in the background. However, very few people, I don't know, let's guess maybe 10%, can intentionally offload tasks to subconscious processing. While it may happen occasionally or done by very advanced and capable thinkers, leaders cannot design workflows that depend on it. Doing so creates failure conditions for nearly everyone. Another thing to consider is the brain's filtering system. The reticular activating system, or RAS, this neural network acts as a gatekeeper, filtering millions, perhaps billions or more, of data bits of sensory data down to the 40 to 50 bits per second that reach conscious awareness and its saturation. That's important. Without this filter, you'd be overwhelmed by the temperature of the air, the feeling of your clothes, the hum of electronics, countless sensory input details. In our hyper-connected workplaces, the RAS is constantly reprioritizing what gets through. Each notification, each interruption forces a filtering decision. Your brain treats most interruptions as potentially urgent, an evolutionary survival mechanism. So that Slack message, it triggers the same neural pathways as a predator rustling in the bushes. It's no wonder we're exhausted all the time. The stress trap completes this vicious cycle. When we push our cognitive systems beyond their limits, cortisol floods our system. Chronic cortisol exposure literally damages the brain, shrinking the prefrontal cortex, exactly the reason we need for planning, focus, and emotional regulation. Therefore, the harder we push to catch up, the less capable we become of actually catching up. It's like trying to run faster by progressively damaging our legs. Given these biological realities, it's no surprise that our traditional productivity approaches fail so spectacularly. Let's start with time management. Every productivity guru has a system: blocks, boxes, lists, matrices. These work beautifully for simple, predictable tasks. However, modern knowledge work isn't simple or predictable. Time management assumes that if we just organize our hours better, we'll get more done. The reality is that when we're already at the cognitive capacity, reshuffling the deck chairs doesn't add more chairs. Worse, as complexity increases, the overhead of managing the system itself becomes a burden. I've seen people spend an hour daily just updating and managing their productivity system. A perfect example of the problem becoming the so-called solution. Task saturation makes prioritization impossible. When everything is urgent, nothing is. When you have 50 high priority items, you effectively have zero priorities. The cognitive load of constantly reevaluating and choosing between tasks becomes itself a major drain of productivity. Analysis paralysis isn't laziness, it's a predictable result of cognitive overload. We compound the problem by optimizing for efficiency in systems that need adaptability. Efficiency works when you're doing the same thing repeatedly. Perfect for assembly lines, terrible for innovation and creativity. Complex knowledge work requires learning, experimentation, and course correction. When we push for maximum efficiency, we eliminate the slack time needed for these adaptive, emergent, creative behaviors. Technology, which promised to be our salvation, it often amplifies the dysfunction. Each new tool adds complexity. The average knowledge worker juggles email, Slack, Teams, project management software, documentation systems, calendars, and specialized applications. Each has its own interface, notification system, and workflow. Instead of simplifying work, we've fragmented it and our ability to focus across a dozen platforms. The notification problem deserves special attention. A University of California study found that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully refocus on the original task. In a typical office, interruptions happen every 11 minutes. Do the math. We literally never reach deep focus. We're perpetually operating at cognitive surface level. Further exacerbating the problem, our organizational cultures reinforce these dysfunctions. Hero culture celebrates the developer who codes all weekend to hit a deadline, not the one who planned well enough to avoid the crisis. We equate availability with commitment. If you're not instantly responsive to messages, you're not a team player. Protecting focused time is seen as selfish rather than strategic. Slack time, meaning unscheduled space for thinking, planning, and recovery, that's viewed as inefficiency rather than an investment. Yet every complex system needs slack to handle variation and enable adaptation. When we run at 100% utilization, any unexpected event creates cascading failures. It's like driving a car with the engine constantly redlined. You have no reserve capacity for hills or emergencies. And sometimes we land in this paradox through nothing more than good intentions. Whether we're trying to impress, support, or simply be helpful, we often create pressure to deliver when none is actually required. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do our best or to go above and beyond. The risk is setting expectations unnecessarily high and then falling short. That gap, it erodes trust. It adds pressure, increases stress, and puts us exactly in the mental state that makes it even harder to deliver. In trying to exceed expectations, we unintentionally sabotage our ability to meet them. So, what actually works? Let's start with a fundamental shift from time management to energy management. Humans have natural rhythms, cognitive peaks and valleys throughout the day. Research shows most people have a morning peak, an afternoon trough, and an evening recovery. Working with within these rhythms rather than against them dramatically improves both output and satisfaction, and it also makes it easier for us to get through our day. Map your own energy patterns for a week. When do complex tasks feel easier? When does creativity work flow? Schedule your most demanding cognitive work during your peak hours. Use troughs for routine tasks or necessary breaks. This isn't laziness, it's strategic scheduling to achieve the best results within your natural work rhythms. Deep work and flow states represent our highest productivity potential. In these states, hours pass like minutes and complex problems yield to focused attention. However, flow requires uninterrupted time, typically 60 to 90 minutes minimum. This means designing systems that protect focus time. Some teams implement focus blocks where no meetings, messages, or interruptions are allowed. Others use physical signals like headphones, closed doors, status indicators to protect work time. Now, here's the counterintuitive truth. Strategic constraints increase productivity. Fewer priorities mean greater impact. When you limit work in progress, quality improves, delivery speeds up, and stress decreases. To get started requires one difficult conversation to shift and reset expectations. And through consistent delivery, we then create sustainable momentum. The pattern I've seen work over and over again is to undercommit and then over-deliver whenever possible. Every single one of my coaching clients has fallen into the trap of overcommitting and under-delivering. And every single one has experienced the relief and success that comes from making the shift. This approach runs counter to hero culture, where over-promising is often mistaken for ambition. By contrast, when you consistently deliver more than you promise, trust builds, predictability improves, and you naturally create slack time for quality, adaptation, innovation, and creativity. I get it. It's easier and frankly more pleasant to say yes. Saying no is hard. We want to do more, give more, help more. These are good intentions. And they often come from a people-pleasing mindset that creates exactly the kind of unnecessary pressure we talked about earlier. If we truly want to deliver our best at a consistent, sustainable pace, we have to stop damaging our brain with cortisol spikes because we're once again running late. Instead, we can show kindness to ourselves by setting ourselves up for success, by avoiding the overcommitting trap. When we undercommit, we create the space necessary to over-deliver. And when that happens, customers and colleagues notice because the extra effort stands out as going above and beyond. Another powerful shift is batching similar work, which reduces context switching costs. Instead of answering emails throughout the day, batch them into 2 or 3 focus sessions. Group similar cognitive tasks. For example, all of your writing, all of your analysis, all of your creative work. This minimizes attentional residue and lets you build momentum within each type of work. For example, I batch my YouTube channel work by dedicating one day to script writing, another to thumbnail creation, and a third to titles and descriptions. Each requires a completely different type of focus and creative approach. By batching this way, I work through them much faster than if I switched between writing, visual design, and marketing copy for each video. Lastly, let's talk about pull systems, borrowed from lean thinking. They offer another powerful alternative. Instead of having work pushed onto teams and individuals, they pull work when they have capacity. This respects cognitive limits and maintains quality by preventing overload. It requires trust. Managers must believe teams will pull work responsibly. And when implemented well, pull systems create sustainable pacing and predictable delivery. The key to all these approaches is designing work around human capabilities rather than in defiance of them. Most productivity strategies forget that we're not machines to be optimized. We're adapted biological systems that thrive when supported, not squeezed. When we align work design with how our brains actually function, productivity stops being something we chase and starts being something that emerges naturally. Now let's bring AI into the conversation. Artificial intelligence can either amplify our productivity paradox or help us transcend it. The difference lies not in the technology, but in how we apply it. AI acts as a force multiplier. It amplifies whatever patterns already exist. If your workflows are chaotic, AI will accelerate the chaos. If your prioritization is unclear, AI will generate more unfocused output faster. I've seen organizations implement AI tools expecting magical productivity gains, only to find they've automated dysfunction at scale. Consider a real example. A company implemented an AI system to help manage customer service tickets. The AI could categorize, route, and even draft responses. Sounds great, right? Unfortunately, their underlying process was broken. Tickets bounced between departments, priorities were unclear, and nobody owned resolution. The AI just made tickets bounce faster. Response time actually increased because the AI created more handoffs than the humans who previously were using their judgment to shortcut the broken process. Contrast this with organizations that first clarify their workflows, then apply AI thoughtfully. When context and clarity are present, AI unlocks genuine insight and efficiency. It handles routine cognitive tasks, freeing humans for complex problem solving. It identifies patterns humans miss. It provides decision support without creating decision paralysis. The key is designing AI systems that support human rhythms rather than disrupting or trying to control them. Constant AI generated alerts and recommendations can worsen cognitive overload. Instead, effective and selective AI implementation batches insights, respects focus time, and presents information when humans are ready to process it. One team I worked with, they were redesigning the AI analytics dashboards to deliver insights. And they made a modification to present them to the team once daily during their morning planning session, rather than streaming the alerts all throughout the day. Productivity jumped, not because the AI got smarter, but because its outputs aligned with human cognitive patterns and their ability to absorb and process the information. It's really tempting to over-leverage AI's capabilities. I recently went through an application design session with an AI system and suggested creating log entries for every function call. I thought this would give me great observability. It was actually the AI that cautioned me against this, pointing out it would create massive information overload. Yeah, the AI was right. We ended up co-designing a much better approach with selective logging at key decision points. It was a humbling reminder that even when working with AI, it's easy to fall into the same productivity traps. Good design remains essential before any implementation. The future of productivity lies not in humans versus AI, but in human AI collaboration. Shared decision making leverages the strengths of both. AI's processing power and pattern recognition with human creativity, judgment, and contextual understanding. This requires us to view AI not as a replacement for human cognition, but as an augmentation of it. Ultimately, culture remains the differentiator. Organizations with healthy, human centric cultures will use AI to enhance human potential. Those stuck in industrial age thinking will use AI to demand even more from already overtaxed workers. The technology is neutral. Our choices determine its impact. So let's recap the key patterns we've explored. The productivity paradox emerges when we apply industrial age thinking to knowledge work. Working harder doesn't equal working better. Our brains have fundamental limits that no amount of willpower or technology can overcome. Traditional approaches fail because they ignore these cognitive realities. The solutions require a fundamental shift in how we think about work. Energy management over time management, deep work over multitasking, rather task switching, strategic constraints over endless priorities, pull systems over push systems. And when we add AI to this foundation, we amplify human capability rather than human stress. So here are some questions for personal and team reflection. What work feels urgent yet isn't truly important? Where are you confusing activity with impact? Which tasks could you batch to reduce context switching? When during your day do you have peak cognitive energy? And how might AI help you protect rather than fragment your focus? For practices to try this week, start by tracking your energy levels and mapping them to your work. Experiment with batching similar tasks. Try working in 45-minute focused blocks with 15-minute breaks. Visualize your work in progress and set limits. And most importantly, have that difficult conversation about realistic commitments. If you want a deep dipper, I recommend that you read the book that I mentioned earlier, The Myth of Multitasking by Dave Crenshaw. It's concise, practical, and will forever change how you think about focus and productivity. Remember, this isn't about working less, it's about working in alignment with how our brains actually function to achieve the greatest and best results. When we respect our cognitive architecture, we unlock sustainable high performance. When we fight it, we create the very paradox we're trying to solve. So, what's one change you'll make this week to start breaking your own productivity paradox? Share in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiments and results. And if you'd like to learn more about mindfulness and how it helps us leverage some of that subconscious mental processing capacity, click one of these. I'll be happy to tell you all about it.